part of what bothered me later. If it had looked isolated or run down, I probably would have expected something to feel off. Instead, it looked exactly like the kind of place people rent for a quiet weekend away. I booked it for 2 nights in early October because I needed to get out of my apartment for a bit. A friend canceled on me last minute, so I almost skipped the trip. But it was already paid for, and the cabin was only about an hour and a half away, tucked into a wooded area outside a small town. The host messaged me that morning with check-in instructions. Everything was through a keypad on the front door. He mentioned one locked owner's closet in the hallway that I should ignore, and said the detached shed behind the house was off limits too. I got there around 5. The house was smaller than it looked in the pictures, but otherwise it matched the listing. Single story, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a narrow hallway connecting everything. The owner's closet was exactly where he said it would be, halfway down the hall. It was a plain white door with a keypad deadbolt on it. The first couple of hours were completely normal. I unpacked groceries, checked the rooms, and settled in. Nothing looked wrong. The beds were made. The bathroom was clean. The windows were locked. There was a binder on the coffee table with Wi-Fi information and checkout rules. By the time I finished eating, it was dark outside. The property was surrounded by trees on 3 sides, with one other cabin visible through the woods off to the left. At night, it looked like a single square of yellow light floating between branches. I remember standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing a plate, and noticing how quiet it was. No traffic, no voices, just insects outside and the hum of the refrigerator. The first thing that felt off was the shower. I took one before bed, and the water pressure dropped suddenly halfway through. Not completely, just enough that I noticed. It stayed weak for maybe 10 seconds, then came back. Then, while I was brushing my teeth, I heard something click in the hallway. It was a small sound, but in a quiet house it stood out. I stepped out of the bathroom and looked down the hall. Nothing. Every door was exactly where it should have been, including the owner's closet. Still shut. Still locked. I went to bed around midnight. The room I used was at the end of the hall, opposite the second bedroom. I shut my door most of the way, but not fully. At some point during the night, I woke up because of a light. Not a bright one, just a thin line of warm light stretching across the floor from the hallway. For a second, I was disoriented, and then I realized the second bedroom door was open. I was sure it had been closed when I went to bed. I lay there listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no voices, no movement. Eventually, I got up, walked into the hall, and looked inside. The room was empty. Just a made bed, a dresser, and a chair in the corner. The window was locked from the inside. I checked because that was the only explanation that made sense to me in the moment. Then I shut the door and went back to sleep. The next morning, I almost laughed it off. Old house. Door not latched fully. Maybe a draft. That explanation worked until I saw the coffee mug. I had used one of the mugs from the kitchen the night before for tea. I remembered leaving it in the sink with the tea bag still inside because I was too tired to deal with it. But when I went into the kitchen, the mug was on the drying rack. Clean. Turned upside down. The tea bag was gone. I stood there for a full minute, trying to decide whether I had washed it and forgotten. That sounds stupid now, but in the moment your brain tries hard to keep things normal. I was alone in an unfamiliar house. It made more sense to blame myself than to jump straight to the idea that someone else had done it. Still, I started paying closer attention. I checked the front door. Locked. Back door. Locked. Every window. Locked. Then I looked at the owner's closet again. Nothing obviously different, but I noticed a faint scuff mark on the floor in front of it, like the door had been opened recently and dragged slightly over the wood. I tried the knob even though I knew I should not. Locked. That whole day, little things kept bothering me. When I came back from a hike around noon, The lamp in the living room was on. I knew I had turned it off. Later, while I was making coffee, I heard a dull bump from somewhere in the wall behind the hallway. I messaged the host and asked if anyone ever came by for maintenance without notice. He replied 15 minutes later with one sentence: "No one should be there but you." That should have been reassuring. It was not. By then, I had started noticing how the house was arranged. The owner's closet sat exactly between the bathroom and second bedroom, taking up more space in the hallway than a normal closet should have. That night, I decided I was probably overreacting. I made dinner, locked the doors again, and turned on a movie in the living room just to keep some noise in the house. Around 10:30, I paused it because I heard something unmistakable. A cough. Not outside. Inside the house. It came from the hallway. I stared at the dark opening between the living room and the hall and waited. A few seconds later, I heard the soft metallic sound of a lock being touched. Then silence. I got up slowly and walked far enough to see the hall. The owner's closet door was open. Only an inch or two, but definitely open. I do not remember making a decision after that. I grabbed my keys off the kitchen counter, left everything else where it was, and went out the back door. I got into my car and drove to the end of the gravel road before I stopped. From there, I called the host. At first, he sounded confused. Then, when I said the closet door had opened on its own, he went silent long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Finally, he said, "You need to leave the property." Not, "Are you sure?" Not, "That's impossible." Just that. I asked him what was in the closet. He said, "There's a utility passage behind it." I asked if anyone had access to it. Another pause. Then he said, "The previous owner's son used to." That answer made no sense, and he knew it. I asked him to explain, and he admitted there was a narrow maintenance corridor built into the center of the house. The owner's closet opened into a small storage area, but behind a second unfinished panel, there was a crawl-like passage that connected to an exterior hatch hidden behind the shed. He had sealed it after buying the property, or thought he had. I did not go back that night. The next afternoon, after daylight and after the host said he had checked the place himself, I returned only long enough to get my bag. The owner's closet was shut again. The hall looked normal, but inside the kitchen trash, right on top, was the tea bag from the mug I had left in the sink the first night. That was the part I could not explain away anymore. Someone had been inside that house the whole time, close enough to hear me in the shower, close enough to open the second bedroom door while I slept, close enough to wash a mug so I would spend the next morning doubting my own memory instead of trusting what was right in front of me. The first thing I noticed was the light under the spare bedroom door. It was a thin yellow line across the upstairs hallway carpet, and for a second, I just stood at the bottom of the stairs looking at it, trying to remember if I had left it on that morning. I was 19 when this happened, and my parents had gone out of town for one night to visit my aunt after a surgery. I stayed home because I had an early shift the next day. Being alone in the house never really bothered me. It was a normal 2-story place in a quiet neighborhood, and I had spent nights there by myself before without thinking much about it. The spare bedroom was at the end of the hall across from my room. Nobody used it except when relatives visited, so the light in there was almost never on. That was why it stood out immediately. I had gotten home a little after 9:30 after meeting a friend for dinner. When I came in, everything downstairs felt normal. I locked the front door, tossed my keys on the kitchen counter, fed the dog, and turned on the TV in the living room. I was down there for maybe half an hour before I went upstairs to change. That was when I saw the light. At first, I told myself I must have turned it on while getting laundry earlier and forgotten to switch it off. That kind of thing happens when you are alone. You stop paying attention to small details because there is nobody else around to notice them. I went up the stairs, walked to the spare bedroom, and pushed the door open. The room was empty. Everything looked exactly the way it always did. Made bed. Closed blinds. The old wooden chair in the corner with one of my mother's extra blankets folded over it. I reached in, switched the lamp off, and went to my room. That should have been the end of it. But when I came back downstairs 10 minutes later, the dog was standing in the foyer staring up toward the second floor. He was not barking, just standing still with his ears up. I asked him what he was doing, and he did not even look at me. He kept staring toward the landing like he was listening to something above us. Then he slowly walked into the kitchen and sat by the back door. I remember thinking that was odd, but I still was not scared. The house made sounds all the time. Floorboards, pipes, the heat kicking on. I had lived there long enough that most of them blended together. At around 10:15, I got up to make tea. The mug I usually used was already sitting on the counter beside the sink. That did not make sense. I had left it in the dishwasher earlier that morning. I knew that because I had unloaded half the clean dishes before work and left the rest for later. The mug should have still been in there with the other cups. I stood looking at it for a few seconds. Then I opened the dishwasher. There was an empty space where the mug had been. That was the first moment I felt a real shift in the house. A normal explanation still existed, but it was getting harder to find one. Maybe I had taken it out without thinking when I came in. Maybe I was more tired than I realized. I used a different mug instead. Then, while the kettle was heating, I heard the toilet flush upstairs. I froze. Not a pipe noise, not a creak. An actual flush. The sound carried clearly down the hall and through the stairwell. For a second, I did not move at all. I just stood there with one hand on the counter, listening to the tank refill in the upstairs bathroom. Then came a soft click, the bathroom door opening. I turned off the stove immediately and backed away from the kitchen island. The dog had heard it too. He came out of the corner where he had been lying and stood beside me, looking toward the stairs. I said, "Dad?" I do not know why I said it. My parents were 2 hours away. I had talked to my mother less than an hour earlier. No one answered. I waited maybe 10 seconds, then went to the hall closet and took out the aluminum baseball bat my father kept by the coats during winter. The whole time I kept listening for another sound upstairs. Nothing. I climbed the stairs slowly, one hand on the rail, the bat in the other. Every light upstairs was off except the hall light over the bathroom mirror. The bathroom door was open halfway. When I reached the top, I could see the toilet lid was up. I never left it up. I checked the bathroom first. Empty. Then I turned toward the spare room again. The lamp was on. That is the detail I remember most clearly. The lamp I had turned off maybe 20 minutes earlier was now glowing through the crack under the door again. I backed up a step without meaning to. Something moved inside the room. Not a full shape, just the quick shadow of a leg crossing the light. I did not go in. I ran back downstairs, grabbed my keys and the dog's leash, and got out the front door as fast as I could. The dog nearly dragged me down the porch, because by then he was panicked too. I drove straight to the gas station at the entrance to our neighborhood and called my father. He and my mother started back immediately. My father told me to stay where there were lights and people and not go home until he got there. It took them nearly an hour. That was the longest hour of my life. When my father finally pulled into the gas station, he had my uncle with him. I went back with them because I did not want to sit there alone any longer, but I stayed in the car when they first went inside. They checked the whole house together. When my father came back out, his face looked different. Not panicked, just flat. He told me someone had definitely been inside. The back door had been unlocked from the inside. The screen on the small kitchen window had been removed and set against the fence. In the spare bedroom, the lamp was still on, and the closet door They found muddy prints on the carpet inside the closet and along the edge of the bed where somebody had stood. What got me was the rest of it. The mug on the counter, a damp ring in the upstairs sink, a half-full glass of water on my father's nightstand. Small things. Quiet things. Signs of somebody moving around the house without rushing, using rooms like he had time. My father thinks the man got in before I came home and stayed upstairs when he heard me downstairs. That makes sense, because if he had entered later, I would have heard the window or the back door. Instead, he was already there when I walked in. Already inside, listening while I fed the dog and watched TV and made tea. I still think about that spare bedroom light. Not because it was the first sign, because it was probably not a sign at all. It was more likely a mistake. Something he forgot to turn off while moving around upstairs. One small slip that gave away the fact that I was not alone in the house. I booked the place because the listing said, "private guest house." That phrase mattered. Separate entrance, full privacy, self-check-in, no shared indoor spaces. I read those lines more than once because I was booking it for a 2-night stay by myself, and the whole point of the trip was to get away from people for a weekend. It was about 40 minutes outside the city, near a small lake town. The picture showed a detached rental over a garage behind a larger house. It looked clean and recently renovated. White walls, gray couch, small kitchen, 1 bedroom, and a balcony facing the trees. The host sent me a keypad code for the side entrance and said she would not be on the property during my stay. If I needed anything, I could message her through the app. I got there around 6 on a Friday. The main house sat closer to the road, and the rental was behind it above a 2-car garage. A gravel driveway curved around to the back, and a narrow staircase ran up the outside wall to the guest house door. At first glance, everything matched the listing photos. The only thing that stood out was a dark SUV parked beside the main house. I assumed it belonged to a neighbor or someone the host forgot to mention. It did not bother me much because there were no lights on inside the main house. The place looked empty. Inside, everything looked normal. Clean counters, folded towels, a welcome note with the Wi-Fi password, and a binder full of checkout instructions. There was one locked door beside the bedroom closet, labeled Owner Storage. Please do not enter. I changed clothes, went out to get takeout, and came back after dark. The SUV was still there. I remember standing in the gravel lot with the food bag in my hand, looking at the main house. Still dark, still quiet. I ate on the couch and watched part of a movie on my laptop. Around 10:30, I took a shower and got ready for bed. Before turning the lights off, I checked the front door lock. It was locked. The first thing that woke me up was a thud, not loud enough to sound like a door slamming, more like something heavy set down on a wooden floor. I opened my eyes and listened. Then came a slow step. Then another. I was fully awake after that. The bedroom was dark, but I could see the outline of the door and dresser from the streetlight through the curtains. I listened hard, trying to place where the sound was coming from. Not outside. Inside the rental. More specifically, beneath me. That was what confused me. I was staying above a garage, so hearing occasional settling sounds from below would have made sense. But these were footsteps. Deliberate, spaced apart, moving from one side of the floor to the other. I checked my phone. 2:18 a.m. The footsteps stopped. Then I heard a metallic sound from somewhere near the kitchen. A soft click, followed by a faint vibration, like someone lightly testing a handle. I got out of bed and moved to the bedroom door as quietly as I could. I opened it just enough to see into the main room. Everything looked normal. Then I noticed the locked interior door by the closet. It was not fully shut anymore. Earlier that evening, the latch had sat flush in the frame. Now it was open maybe half an inch. I did not touch it. I backed away, went straight to the front door, and checked the deadbolt again. Still locked. Then I looked out through the peephole. The outside stairs were empty. The gravel lot below was empty too. The SUV was gone. I did not sleep after that. I stayed on the couch with all the lights on, waiting for daylight. By morning, nothing else had happened. As soon as it was bright enough, I messaged the host and asked whether anyone had been on the property overnight. She replied 20 minutes later. No, nobody should have been there. I told her I heard footsteps inside the unit and that the owner's storage door had been partly open in the morning. She responded, "That's not possible. It's locked from the other side." That answer sat wrong with me immediately. I asked what was actually behind that door. She did not answer that question. Instead, she said she could send maintenance later if I wanted, but that she was sure I had heard pipes or the garage door contracting from the cold. I should have left then. Instead, I told myself I was overreacting. The rest of the morning was normal. I hiked for a few hours, had lunch in town, and came back around 3. The first thing I noticed when I pulled into the drive was the SUV. Same one as the night before. Parked this time on the far side of the garage, under some trees, where it was harder to see from the road. That made my stomach drop. I parked near the stairs and just sat in my car for a minute looking at it. No one got out. The windows were too dark to see inside. I messaged the host again and asked if someone was working on the property. No answer. I went inside anyway because all my stuff was up there. The unit looked normal at first. Then I saw the bathroom mirror. It was fogged at the edges, just enough that it looked like someone had showered recently. There was also a damp towel hanging over the rack. Not one of the folded extras. One of the 2 towels I had used the night before. I knew exactly how I had left it. On the hook by the sink, spread out to dry. Now it was bunched over the rack like someone had used it quickly. That was when I packed. I just grabbed everything I could see, shoved it into my bag, and kept listening for any sound from the locked interior door. Nothing came. When I had almost everything, I noticed something else on the kitchen counter. A mug. I had not used any mugs there. I bought coffee in town that morning and left the cup in my car. But there on the counter was a ceramic mug with a wet ring under it and a faint lipstick stain on the rim. I took my bag to the car and left the unit door open behind me because I did not want to turn my back to it. Once everything was in the trunk, I drove down to the public boat launch near the lake and called the host through the app. She answered on the 3rd try, sounding out of breath. I told her I was leaving and wanted a refund for the 2nd night because someone had clearly been using the rental while I was there. She went quiet for several seconds. Then she said, "You weren't supposed to notice the garage level." I asked her what that meant, and she started explaining in a rushed voice that the lower level of the guest house was occasionally occupied by her sister when she came to town, and that the locked storage door led to an interior staircase the sister could use to access part of the upper unit if necessary. I asked if she seriously meant someone could come into the rental from inside while it was booked as a private guest house. She said, "Only in emergencies." I asked what part of a lipstick-stained mug and a used towel sounded like an emergency. She did not answer that. What finally made the whole thing click was one sentence she said right after. "She thought you were out for the night." That was the part that stayed with me. Not just that someone else had access to the rental, that someone had been timing my movements, watching when I came and went, waiting until they thought the place was empty enough to use it. I never went back up there. I drove home, ate the cost of the 2nd night, and blocked the host. Every detail seemed harmless on its own. Until you wake up in the middle of the night, hearing footsteps inside a place you paid to be alone in, and realize the upstairs unit was never empty at all.